Up next in the broadcast, President Park and visiting Chinese President Xi announced joint concerns over Japan's recent moves to rewrite history and implement a stronger military posture under the premise of collective self-defense. On the second and final day of Chinese President Xi Jin-ping's state visit, hundreds of business leaders from Korea and China gather to expand high-level contact, while China's First Lady engages in cultural diplomacy and expresses her fondness for Korean dramas. And Japan lifts some of its sanctions against North Korea in return for Pyongyang relaunching an investigation into the fate of Japanese citizens who were abducted decades ago. Primetime News begins now.
Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Kang Tae-ri in Seoul.
I'm Sean Lim. Thanks for joining us. Chinese President Xi Jinping wrapped up his two-day state visit to South Korea this Friday.
He spent most of his final day in Seoul with President Park Geun-hye, both of whom expressed concerns over Japan's recent moves to review history and strengthen the role of its military. Connie Kim starts us off.
With regard to Tokyo's decision to expand its military role in Northeast Asia, both Xi and Park said many countries are concerned about the move and that more than half of the Japanese population opposes it. Regarding Tokyo's recent review of a 1993 apology for wartime sexual enslavement, the leaders expressed regret and said Japan was trying to undermine its previous apology.
The two leaders exchanged thoughts that Japan is trying to destroy and downgrade its 1993 Kono statement when it said it would preserve it.
They also said they were concerned about Japan partially lifting its North Korea sanctions in return for a reinvestigation into the abduction of Japanese nationals in the 1970s and 80s. As for Japan's historical tensions with its neighboring countries, China's foreign ministry announced Friday that President Xi had proposed a joint commemoration with South Korea next year to mark the 70th anniversary of two events in 1945, China's victory in the Second Sino-Japanese War and Korea regaining its independence from Japan. But this has not been confirmed by South Korea's presidential office. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
And staying with the Chinese President Xi's visit to Seoul, the leader also went to one of the nation's top universities to talk to a group of students.
And he wasn't shy about sharing strongly worded comments over Japan's history. Ji Myung-gil has more.
President Xi Jinping became the first Chinese president to speak to a group of Korean students at a local university on Friday. In an address to some 500 students at Seoul National University, the Chinese leader vowed to further strengthen bilateral relations between Seoul and Beijing through their strategic cooperative partnership. He used strong words to recount the suffering of China and Korea under Japan's militarism in the early 20th century, describing Tokyo's actions against the two countries as barbarous and aggressive. Xi said that when the war against Japan was at its height, the Chinese and Korean people experienced a shared suffering and gave sweat and blood to help each other. The Chinese president's evocation of Tokyo's military past is seen by many as a call for Korea and China to confront Japan over its denials of history. He also said that both countries could deepen their mutual understanding by diversifying their cooperation in the culture arena.
China will open up a new horizon in China-Korea relations as China will pursue peace and cooperation between the two countries. China and Korea must cooperate in order to open up new opportunities. We will strengthen cultural exchanges in the humanities and liberal arts. This will help foster friendly ties among the people of both countries.
President Xi said Korea and China are each other's closest partner, biggest investor, and most favored place for travel, which has led to rapid growth in Korea-China relations. Ji Myung-gil, Arirang News.
And, you know, President Xi Jinping actually mentioned one of our Korean soap operas, My Love from the Star, of course, you know.
Right.
And during his talk with these students, he said the drama enjoyed explosive popularity in China. He knew about it, and that's a surprise.
Yeah. And it seems as if he may have watched it with his wife, because
Sure.
the wife,
Right.
the First Lady, also mentioned that as well.
Well, she actually jokingly said that she wished her husband was this main character guy. He's an alien if you really think about it, but this character was played by Kim Soo-hyun, and that's the appeal there.
Right. So, well, she was in the arts and entertainment, so I'm sure she's probably used to having a manager, so she probably felt some resonance with, you know, calling out for manager.
Sure, why not?
But you know, there, of course, that show's gaining popularity, but also other shows made in Korea and as a co-production are gaining popularity. Apparently, Korean drama starring actress Jang Na-da and Jang Hyuk, they're reuniting again. They just sold the rights for $120,000 an episode, a record for Korean production, and that's 3 times higher than My Love from Another Star. So
3 times higher
it's a
than
good,
Chang Ji-hyun and Kim Soo-hyun.
Yeah.
Wow, okay, well.
Good progress.
I guess this is one element of the two countries' economic ties, of course. And in fact, President Xi Jinping followed up his speech at the Seoul National University today by meeting with Chinese and Korean business leaders alongside President Park Geun-hye.
There, the Korean leader used the opportunity to put forth a 3-point vision for the future of Seoul-Beijing economic cooperation. Choi Yu-sun has more.
At a forum of Korean and Chinese business leaders alongside a Chinese counterpart, President Park laid out a vision for the future of economic cooperation between the two countries. Citing economic achievements from their 2 decades of bilateral ties, the Korean president stressed the need to diversify two-way cooperation from its current focus on the manufacturing sector. She said Seoul and Beijing should expand exchanges into the service sector in medicine, cultural contents, and finance, and that the direct 1 yuan currency trade market that she and President Xi agreed to establish should help spur a new form of cooperation. President Park also talked about jointly developing and commercializing technologies in areas related to energy, environment, and climate change. Referring to trade relations, the Korean leader said it's now time to establish a stable trading environment through an FTA and expand the two countries' reach into each other's markets. She also pitched Korea's trade pacts with 47 nations to Chinese investors, saying that by investing in Korea, they would be extending their reach in the global market. President Park then proposed linking her Eurasia initiative of expanding energy and logistics infrastructure across the continent and Beijing's New Silk Road vision. She said merging the two would boost Korea and China's competitive edge. In her final remarks to the business leaders, President Park said the future of Korea and China's co-prosperity lies with their efforts and cooperation between the two governments. Wrapping up their 2-day visit to Seoul, President Xi and the First Lady returned to Beijing on this Friday. Choi Yu-sun, Arirang News.
And to discuss the Chinese President Xi Jinping's visit to South Korea this time around in depth, we have a former ambassador to China, Mr. Hwang Byung-tae, joining us right here in the studio. Thanks so much for coming in.
Yes.
Now, let me first ask you, how did you assess his visit to South Korea and potentially the leaders' messages to North Korea and Japan?
As of last years, Chinese became different country because previously there was a so-called the communist bloc countries, the regional powers. But as of last years, they declared themselves the world-class powers and number 2 world power with the United States, and they are dealing with the international affairs. So previously, they were rather, how to secure their regional interests, but now they are more concerned about international peace and all the problems. And therefore, his message to international community that China is dealing with South Korea not as a regional power, but a partners in their dealing with international communities.
So you served as ambassador to China from 1993 to 1996. So it's almost like the 20th anniversary of your ambassadorship. How have Korea-China relations changed since then? And what is this administration doing differently?
at that time, China was tied to the regional power of so-called communist camps. And even though we entered into the diplomatic relationship, they are dealing with North Korea, the political matters, with South Korea's only trade and business. So-called two approach. Now, completely different. And with the North Korea, there are no more anything to do with North Korea. All come to South Korea. So quite different,
So President Xi was accompanied by major Chinese business leaders from conglomerates like Baidu, Alibaba, Huawei, and they've met very closely with Korea's top conglomerate leaders and business leaders. Could you ever imagine such close economic ties, almost a dependent economic ties between Korea and China when you were ambassador? How do you view this economic relationship?
Trade relationship with Korea and China was solely in the field of the trade and commodity exchange and partial investment, not this kind of the full-fledged corporations. Now, with the huge delegation of Chinese groups, their range of discussion is not only limited to the trade, investment, and the future, the communication, all those things. So full-fledged, relationship between two countries.
What has always been the key strategic value of cultivating a very strong relation with China?
We just began, economic relationship only just 20 years ago. Now, China became the largest export market for Korea. And the last years, trade development between two countries more than, the adding up with Japan and United States. So this bespeak what is the meaning of the stories.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Curry's comments came in response to
your gateway to the day's biggest stories in Korea and around the world. Breaking news, the hottest interviews, and a whole lot more. Join Arirang Sean Lim and Kang Che-ri from the heart of Seoul.
News begins now.
Primetime news, weeknights, live at 10 on Arirang TV.
After months of government-level talks, the Abe administration is keeping its promise with North Korea and has lifted some of Japan's sanctions on North Korea. This while North Korea launches a reinvestigation into the fate of Japanese citizens abducted to North Korea decades ago. Hwang Sung-hee reports.
Following a cabinet meeting Friday, Japan formalized its decision to relax sanctions against North Korea. These include lifting travel bans to and from Pyongyang, raising the reporting limit for money taken or sent to North Korea, and allowing port calls by North Korean ships to Japan for humanitarian purposes. In response, North Korea's state-run Korean Central News Agency announced the launch of what it called an all-inclusive and comprehensive investigation to determine the fate of several Japanese citizens abducted to the north decades ago. The 30-member special investigative team, headed by the country's Vice Minister for State Security and led by the powerful National Defense Commission, will be granted a special right to probe any organization in the regime. In 2002, North Korea admitted to abducting 13 Japanese citizens in the 1970s and 80s to help train their spies, but Japan believes even more people were kidnapped. South Korea and the United States, Japan's key allies in countering North Korea's nuclear ambitions, have been calling for transparency in the separate dealings to prevent any friction in their trilateral cooperation. But whether Tokyo and Pyongyang's recent overtures will lead to a concrete shift in regional dynamics is keeping the world on edge. Hwang Sung-hee, Arirang News.
Despite these rather friendly moves between Japan and North Korea in recent weeks, Tokyo is far from ready to call for a resumption of the six-party nuclear talks. Japanese Foreign Minister Kishida Fumio said Friday that Pyongyang would need to refrain from provocations such as missile tests and show sincerity in its push to denuclearize before the six-party dialogue resumes. These comments echo those made by South Korean President Park Geun-hye and Chinese President Xi Jin-ping during their summit talks in Seoul Thursday. The six-party talks, which include China, Japan, Russia, the U.S., and the two Koreas, are aimed at disarming North Korea of its nuclear weapons, but have been stalled since late 2008. Upon President Xi Jinping's visit to Seoul, Beijing's decided to release hard evidence of Japan's wartime atrocities. The Chinese government has also begun revealing confessions by Japanese war criminals and will continue to do so every day for a total of 45 days. There are some disturbing images coming up. Yudian for this report.
The photo shows one of the horrific crimes by Japan's Unit 731. Wearing protective suits, two Japanese soldiers are seen pouring chemicals on a 5 to 6-year-old girl who is writhing in agony. This is just one of the 450 documents revealed by China's State Archives Administration on Japan's biological and chemical warfare during World War II. The fact Unit 731 used poison gas against Chinese soldiers is also described in the document. China has long accused Japan of denying its wartime wrongdoings, and in what's being seen as a timely move, China is releasing evidence of Tokyo's wartime crimes on the occasion of President Xi Jinping's visit to Seoul. On top of the hard evidence, Beijing decided to release confessions of 45 Japanese war criminals, each one for 45 days, on its State Archives Administration website. The handwritten confessions include one that says Japan kidnapped 20 women from Korea and China and used them as prostitutes for Japanese troops.
These archives are hard evidence of the heinous crimes committed by Japan's imperialism against the Chinese.
An editorial from China's official news agency People's Daily added weight to the move, saying Beijing needs to open the eyes of right-wing extremists in Japan who are denying history and breaking the nation's decades-long pacifist constitution. Yurian, Arirang News.
Wealth polarization is expected to worsen globally, and Korea is no exception. A new OECD report says the gap between the rich and the poor in Korea will be the third widest of 29 member nations by 2060. The report says the income of the top 10% in Korea was 4.85 times higher than the bottom 10% in 2010 when it ranked fourth. It says the disparity will widen over the next 50 years, with the income of top earners to be nearly 6.5 times that of those at the bottom of the scale. Israel is expected to top the list, followed by the United States. The OECD attributed the widening gap to highly skilled workers benefiting from technological advances. Legendary ballerina Kang Soo-jin may have assumed the top position at the Korean National Ballet earlier this year, but that doesn't mean she's hung up her ballet slippers just yet. She is set to star in a special ballet created just for her that has its Korean premiere this weekend. Our Park Ji-won sat down with her to talk about the production and the two demanding roles she's taken on.
This will be one of the few chances to see legendary ballerina Kang Soo-jin perform before her planned retirement from the stage in 2016. So this weekend's ballet Madame Butterfly, which was made and choreographed just for her, is a must-see production.
How I interpret my butterfly is how I am actually. All my color can come out in this Madame Butterfly as a woman.
She says the main character Cho-Cho-san has many different facets, from purity and sensitivity to charismatic strength, which all reflect her personality. When asked how she handles two demanding jobs, director of the National Ballet Company and a performer, she says she enjoys doing both.
Being on stage dancing, it's my food, because I always danced because I loved it. Being director is another thing. I love it. It's such a challenge for me and very important with all the dancers, all the workers. I think to breathe together, to have the same tempo and same mind, that it can bring the success. And I do have this feeling with the National Ballet.
The choreographer of this neo-classic ballet says the production would not have been made without Kang. And when the ballet premiered in Austria last year, all the performances were sold out.
We did it with love for what we do, with passion. It was very nice for everybody, and I'm happy about the result, and I hope that the love that we had doing this production, the public in Korea would feel it also.
The ballet runs from Friday to Sunday at the Seoul Arts Center. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
An overpass in one of the host cities of the World Cup in Brazil has collapsed on a busy highway, killing at least one person and injuring dozens of others.
With more on this story, we now turn to Paul Yee at the News Center. Paul, do we know what caused this deadly collapse?
Well, the overpass was still under construction in the southeastern city of Belo Horizonte, which is scheduled to host a semifinal match of the World Cup in Brazil next week. Rescue crews are still trying to reach those that may be still trapped underneath the mass of concrete and steel. The bridge crushed a commuter bus and a car, leaving one person dead and 19 injured, according to the city's fire department. Meanwhile, protesters are back on the streets, blaming the government and FIFA for heavy spending on the World Cup and delays in infrastructure projects for the accident. The cost of human life has also taken its toll on public sentiment, as 8 workers were killed in the construction of stadiums for the international football event. Israeli President Shimon Peres has called for restraint as clashes erupt between police and Palestinians in East Jerusalem. Angry protesters hurled stones and firebombs at Israeli security forces, who arrested 6 people on Thursday. The street battles were triggered by the discovery of the body of a Palestinian teen near the city, and tensions are feared to escalate with the funeral of 17-year-old Mohammed Abu Qadar.
People who are engaged in incitement are not aware where incitement can lead to more sorrow, to more dangers. It's time to all of us to show restraint, to show understanding.
Israel's military forces have been trading fire with Palestinian militants for weeks, but Hamas has reportedly offered to halt its rocket attacks, with Egyptian officials attempting to mediate a ceasefire. And finally, turning now to the crisis in Ukraine, President Petro Poroshenko says he's ready to renew a ceasefire with pro-Russian separatists, but only if it's observed by both sides. He also said it would be necessary for the rebels to release all hostages and allow the OSCE to control battle lines in eastern Ukraine. The White House says U.S. Vice President Joe Biden spoke to Poroshenko on Thursday about the peace plan, as well as further sanctions against Russia. Meanwhile, Colonel General Valery Halete has been appointed as the country's new defense minister. Halete has been tasked with restoring Ukraine's failing military capabilities and fighting corruption. And that wraps up our look at international stories making headlines around the world. I'll see you back here next week.
Hello and welcome to Primetime Sports. I'm Stephen Chad. After a few days off, the World Cup quarterfinals are finally upon us, and they're all big matches. They kick off this weekend, so let's take a look at the schedule. Now we have 2 continental rivals playing on Friday in Brazil or early Saturday morning here in Korea. First up, European powerhouses France and Germany go head-to-head in the 1 o'clock match. The offensive prowess of both teams will be on display. The 5 o'clock game will also be huge. Host Brazil goes up against heated rivals Colombia in the highly anticipated matchup. Now on Saturday in Brazil or early Sunday morning here in Korea, the round wraps up. In the earlier game, Argentina and Belgium meet on the pitch. We can expect to see Lionel Messi and Eden Hazard trade offensive blows. Meanwhile, the final match of the quarterfinals features the Netherlands and Costa Rica. It's the goal-leading Dutch set to clash against a stingy Los Ticos defense. And in other football news, Luis Suarez is on his way to Spain after his current club, Liverpool, and Barcelona FC struck a tentative deal for the striker. Now, the 2 clubs are still in talks over his transfer fee. Barcelona has offered £72 million, or about $124 million in cash, but that's about $13 million less than what Liverpool wants. Meanwhile, the FIFA ban will not prevent the 27-year-old Uruguayan from getting a medical and making the switch. An agreement is expected this weekend. And finally, here in Korea, the K-League Classic returns to action over the weekend after taking a long break for the World Cup. It all kicks off again with the top division teams in play, starting with 4 matches on Saturday and 2 on Sunday. And with the South Korean national team home from Brazil, all of the teams will be at full force. Meanwhile, fan voting for the All-Star Game continues through next weekend, with the big game taking place on Friday, July 25th. And that's all I have for now. This has been Stephen Che. I'll see you back here later for more from the world of sports.
This afternoon, it was scorching hot here in Seoul, but thankfully it wasn't humid.
I agree. And for more, our Kim Bo-kyung joins us from the Weather Center. Bo-kyung, what's in store?
We have a mix of scorching hot and drizzly conditions ahead of us. On Sunday, hot summer weather is in store here in the central regions, where temperatures are set to jump to 33 degrees. Moving on to our current conditions, some regions down south will continue to see sporadic showers through later tonight. We here in the inland region should have sunny summer conditions on Saturday, but monsoonal front is moving up and is set to hit Jeju by tomorrow afternoon. This will spread to the southern regions on Sunday and move up north to the central regions by Monday. On to Saturday's readings, Seoul soars to a hot 32, while Gwangju and Busan hit the high 20s. As for other places, Jeju and Dokdo reach 23, while Mount Kumgang makes it to 26. As for World Cup weather, the round of 8 games will take place and the weather looks to be nice and sunny with daytime highs peaking at 26 and 29. And that'll do it for now, but I'll be back with more after midnight.
All right, thank you very much, Bo-kyung, for that. And that will do it for this Friday edition of Primetime News.
Have a great weekend, everyone, and we'll see you soon.